Welcome to the BEASTwriter podcast. I am your host, Ryan Sakamoto, and today we're going to be discussing the potential trade rumors involving Matthew Stafford to the San Francisco 49ers. So let's get started. Now, for those who don't know, Matthew Stafford and the Detroit Lions have agreed to mutually part ways in a move that was not surprising, I would say, because Matthew Stafford kind of wanted out last year. Now with a new regime in place, you have Brad Holmes coming from the Los Angeles Rams. I was going to say the St. Louis Rams, but the Los Angeles Rams, who is now the team's new GM, and then you bring in Dan Campbell over from the New Orleans Saints, and you have a new regime in place. Obviously, anytime you have a new head coach, a new GM in place, they're going to want their quarterback of the future, and they'll be married to that quarterback during their tenure with their organization more times than not. So, with that being said, Matthew Stafford out, and they're going in another direction, which means rumors. It's time for trade rumors, guys, and that's where the 49ers come into play. All right, so I've been getting a lot of questions and fielding a lot of questions as to whether I believe Matthew Stafford, one, should be traded to the San Francisco 49ers, and two, what it would take to go ahead and land that type of a quarterback. Well, if you're new to following my podcast, or if you've been following my podcast, you break it down. I like to break it down into three parameters. The first one is who are the players or coaches involved. The second one is why the move was made, or potentially, in this case, could be made. And the last but not least parameter is the instant gratification versus long-term gains. All right, so in this case, who are we talking about? We're talking about Matthew Stafford, right? Matthew Stafford's a guy who's been a top 10 quarterback for the better half of his career. He's always been on these subpar Detroit Lions teams over the course of his career. I think that's sad to say, but that's kind of like the Detroit Lions MO, method of operation. You look at guys like Barry Sanders, you look at guys like Calvin Johnson. They had really good talent over the course of the organization's history. Unfortunately, they haven't had much success in a deep playoff run for whatever reason. And what you see today is a guy that really played his heart and soul into the organization, blood, sweat, and tears, and now he wants out. Understandably so, and maybe a fresh start for both organization and player would be beneficial for all parties involved. And the talk now is San Francisco 49ers. Should the San Francisco 49ers make a play for Matthew Stafford? Well, let's run down the numbers, right? So Matthew Stafford has a $33 million cap number for the upcoming season in 2021. He is tied to $19 million in dead money. So if you do the math, $33 million subtracted by $19 million in dead money comes out to a $14 million in cap savings that the Detroit Lions would have from moving on from Matthew Stafford via trade. So it makes financial sense from Brad Holmes' standpoint to go ahead and make this deal, whether it's the San Francisco 49ers or another NFL team. Furthermore, it would give the Detroit Lions draft flexibility. Anytime you're a GM, the most prized asset, as I stated in my earlier podcast, in discussing any trade involving any player, the last ones I've been talking about is Deshaun Watson, and it comes down to draft capital. That's the most prized asset that any GM wants, is draft picks. And the more draft picks you have, the more darts you have at the board, and the more likelihood you can sustain salary cap health, because you're playing these prime players on young core players on rookie deals. All right, so that's why it's such an important factor to factor in draft capital into any formula when you're a new GM and your 5-year outlook or your 5-year vision is X, right? Whatever that may be. Okay, so it allows Brad Holmes to have draft flexibility. What I mean by that is at number 7, right now, odds are I have them mocked taking quarterback Justin Fields at Ohio State. However, if they were to move on from Matthew Stafford, obviously that becomes a bigger need. But if they were able to possibly land a quarterback via trade like a Jimmy Garoppolo, who would save the 49ers $24.1 million in cap savings, and then giving Brad Holmes a stopgap quarterback in case they don't find a quarterback at number 7, because who knows, the quarterbacks could be all off the board by the time the Lions are on the clock at number 7. Then it allows them draft flexibility to go in another direction at number 7. So you see how this kind of ties in together. You have to always be forward thinking, always thinking from both sides, both organizations, as to how this really looks. If A doesn't happen, you have to have a plan B. If plan B doesn't happen, you have to have a plan C, and so forth. Okay? All of this is just talk right now. Nothing is concrete. Of course, there's people that are talking, saying a trade discussion has taken place with the San Francisco 49ers and the Detroit Lions. I have not heard anything yet. However, I'm not saying that's not happening as we speak, because if I'm GM John Lynch, I am doing my due diligence and getting a guy like Matthew Stafford, a strong arm guy who can really win under Kyle Shanahan's scheme, can go through his progressions, very smart, savvy quarterback, and would be considered somewhat of an upgrade over Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, before I go into the pros and cons of this deal, and if I would make the deal, if I was John Lynch, I'm going to talk about both sides, and then we can come to that conclusion at the end of this podcast. All right, so let's start with the 49ers perspective. We talked about the Lions perspective. Let's talk about the 49ers perspective. From GM John Lynch's perspective, he's going to get an aging quarterback. He is going to be, I believe, 33 by the time his birthday hits in February. And over the course of his career, he's been injury prone, right? He's had neck injuries, he's had hand injuries, he had thumb injuries, he had ankle injuries, he had knee injuries in college. So the list goes on and on and on. And if you play in the NFL long enough, these injuries are going to occur over time. However, the good news is he's tough as nails. So he's not going to be one of these quarterbacks that's just going to frail. He's kind of like an Iron Man, Brett Favre type of player. Very gritty type of a quarterback. Will stand in the pocket, stand tall in the pocket, make the tough throws, and can play with injured, whatever the case may be. Injured foot, injured thumb, injured hand, injured neck, injured spine. I'm joking about the spine, but you get the picture. He's tough. And he still delivers top 10 production. So when you put that all together and into account, you have to take a look at Matthew Stafford, because let's face it, Jimmy Garoppolo helped the 49ers get to the Super Bowl. He's not the sole purpose of getting them into the Super Bowl. And I said that since day one. And people are like, oh no, you're a hater, you're a Jimmy Garoppolo. No, I'm just being honest. And now you're seeing it today. Check my YouTube and Twitter receipts. I said it. It was the strong rushing attack backed up by a stout defense. That's what got the 49ers to the Super Bowl. And if you look at the future behavior, and if you look at the past behavior to indicate what the future behavior is going to look like, you always go back and delve into the past. And in past behavior, when you look at Super Bowl contending teams and teams that actually won the Super Bowl, what did you have? The recipe for success was a strong running game backed up by a stingy defense. Don't make me go back to the dirty archives of 2000 with Baltimore Ravens, Ray Lewis, and they had Jamie Sharper and guys like who else did they have? Tony Siragusa on that team, who were really creating havoc. Peter Bulwer, the list goes on and on and on. And who was their quarterback? Trent Dilfer. So you guys get the picture. Even though the offense, the rules are dictated more toward the offense from when it was set back in 2000, the game is still the same. If you don't win time of possession, if you don't win down in the trenches on both sides of the football, you're not going to go deep in a playoff run. You're just not going to go deep in the playoffs. Plain and simple as that. All right, so like I said, getting back to the 49ers perspective, Jimmy Garoppolo didn't get them to the Super Bowl. He helped them, but he wasn't the sole purpose or the main focus of them being able to get to that point. It was a team all the way around, and I would say more emphasis on the defense as well as the coaching staff and the strong rushing attack that Kyle Shanahan implemented. All right, so with that being said, John Lynch should definitely do his due diligence, because despite all those problems I just pointed out with his injury history and his age, he is a quarterback that can take the 49ers to a different level, right? You look at it from a cap saving standpoint, which I just mentioned with Jimmy Garoppolo and the financials there, but what would it realistically be for Shanahan and John Lynch to realistically give up in order to obtain a quarterback like Matthew Stafford? Well, it can't be a simple swap, quarterback for quarterback. You can't just say, okay, we'll trade you Matthew Stafford, Jimmy Garoppolo. Brad Holmes is going to be like, yeah. Is it April Fool's yet? Is it April 1st? No?
Okay, the joke's on me, bro. No, absolutely not. The joke is on you. I am not going to do a simple swap. What we're going to do is we want your number 12 overall pick in this year's draft. We want that 12th overall pick. So now that we have two first round picks to work with, that leaves us in a draft flexibility advantage because we would be tied with the New York Jets, teams like the Miami Dolphins, teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars, and holding two first round picks in the upcoming draft, and then we can maneuver the draft how we see fit. If you look at what the Detroit Lions need right now, let me just go down the list. I actually made a list. It's right here. Quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, offensive guard, defensive tackle, defensive end, middle linebacker, outside linebacker, cornerback, free safety, and strong safety. So based on the draft position that I have right now, which I will release later on in another podcast, I don't want to spill the beans, but just to get into it, I am working on that. That's why I haven't been on Twitter much today. Been working on that, watching a lot of game film. But back to this topic of the podcast. Yeah, the Lions can go in any direction they see fit. And the more targets you have at the board, the better off you are. I see number 7 could be Justin Fields, right? And at number 12, the way the stack board currently stands up, depending on what happens with Deshaun Watson, it looks like they're going to be in play if they get the number 12 overall pick for whoever that player may be. Could be a Jalen Waddle, at wide receiver. It could be a guy like an offensive lineman like Christian Darrisaw. It could be a Christian Barmore from Alabama. They need defensive line help. It could be a guy that they possibly might even trade up for, in Micah Parsons, right? So these are all kind of things that can come into play. Furthermore, if they want the top cornerback off the board in Patrick Surtain II from Alabama, they can go ahead and make a play for him as well. Of course, the teams drafting in the 7 to 10 range will all be in play for Patrick Surtain because they all need a cornerback that can play that role as a CB1 or CB2 under that system. You look at teams like the Denver Broncos, Dallas Cowboys, even the New York Giants with the mishap with DeAndre Baker in the first round pick. You can see where the value lies, and that's why it's so important that the 49ers give up that number 12 overall pick and give it to the Lions, and that's why the Lions are probably going to be pounding the table for that number 12 overall pick, so they have draft flexibility moving forward. Now, will this take place? Who knows? So the question remains, would I make this deal? People, Ryan, if you were GM John Lynch, would you make this deal? I would say no. After giving all this praise to Matthew Stafford, I would say no. And the reason I say that is because I would rather continue to build through the draft. I would rather hold a number 12 overall pick, keep my assets that I have, and continue building through the draft. Because with the salary cap moving down this year from about 195 to 175, or whatever that number is, you need all the draft picks you can get to kind of fit under the cap. Not only that, but you look at the 5-year or forget 5-year, let's look at the 2 to 3 year outlook. Matthew Stafford only has about 2-3 good years left in his career. That's just my opinion, but take it for what it's worth. He's been injury prone. He's tough as nails, but he's still been injury prone. And playing Matthew Stafford behind this suspect offensive line, how long do you think he'll last? He's going to be weak in the knees. I'll tell you that right now. Are they going to resign Trent Williams? Well, if you bring on a guy like Matthew Stafford, where's the money going to come from? And you have other free agents that you got to go after. Is it worth getting a guy like Alejandro Villanueva from the Pittsburgh Steelers and signing him to maybe a $15 million contract? No, because Villanueva gets out bull rushed every single time. He's not a good fit, in my opinion. If you look back at what Nick Bosa did to him in his rookie year in week 3 last year, you will know what I'm talking about. No, I covered Alejandro Villanueva for the better half of the last 3 years, and since his Pro Bowl berth, he's declined in every single year, which is why the Pittsburgh Steelers aren't going to resign him. Not because they can't afford him, but because they want to go in a different direction. That's just it. All right, but getting back to Matthew Stafford, right? You continue to build through the draft. You don't want to dispose draft capital for an aging quarterback. If I'm GM John Lynch, I'm not making this move. The Super Bowl, let's be honest about something, guys. The Super Bowl window is closed, right? And as much as I hate to say that, it's kind of true. The truth hurts sometimes. The 2020 Revenge Tour never happened. The Hot Boys founder is gone. All gas, no brake mentality has been shipped off to the New York Jets. Take flight. See ya. So, with all that being said, there's no need to panic. Now, I'm not saying that the 49ers can't get back to the Super Bowl. Don't twist my words. I'm just saying the Super Bowl window is not now. It was. They could have if they made the right plays, but they didn't in free agency. They didn't extend DeForest Buckner. They rather extend Eric Armstead. They didn't re-sign Emmanuel Sanders. Things like this, right? And the same needs that they're having going into this year are just more exposed. And now they're in salary cap hell and they have to maneuver the draft, or not maneuver the draft, maneuver the financials and whatever, how they see fit in order to keep as many players as possible. And for those who are saying, oh, we couldn't keep DeForest Buckner. No, if you saw my very first podcast, you would know. I said to release Richard Sherman, you would save $12.9 million by releasing Richard Sherman. Use that money to re-sign DeForest Buckner. Yes. Who, by the way, was a first-team All-Pro. Anyways, getting back to my point. Check those YouTube and Twitter receipts, and everything will be all right. But no, there's no need to panic. If I'm GM John Lynch, I would trust the process, trust the scouts, trust the people in the building. To trust them, to know that everything's going to be right and we can ride this ship. I would rather hold the number 12 overall pick and trade up for Zach Wilson. To me, if you're looking at instant gratification versus long-term gains, the long-term gain of doing that is more beneficial, especially if I'm the coach for the for the foreseeable future. Shanahan's going to be there for at least 10 plus years. So why not have a quarterback you can grow with? The 49ers are not one or two players away from going back to the Super Bowl. They're just not. They're just not. And that's how I see it. Stafford's going to command a hefty price. A first-round pick, to me, is a hefty price for any GM, no matter what draft flexibility you have, even if you have 2 first-round picks like Jacksonville Jaguars GM Trent Baalke. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't make this move. There's a lot of people on Twitter that said, yeah, I'd make it in a heartbeat. Well, if you look at the draft position and how everything stacks up, why not keep the number 12 overall pick and then trade up? Try and trade up using the draft capital that you have, or maybe even tying in some players in order to get that quarterback of the future that you can grow with for the foreseeable future, for the 10-year outlook down the road. Instead of a 2 to 3 year stopgap in hopes that you guys can return to the Super Bowl in 2 to 3 years' time, which it could happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but is it likely? Be realistic about it. They have 40 plus free agents, right? They lost cornerstones of their team's franchise over the past 2 years now, or going to be on 2 years now. So how can you actually say that the 49ers are going to be as strong a team as they were back in 2019? That was the year they should have got it done. And they actually had the Super Bowl in their hands and should have won it. But that's for a different story. So from a Super Bowl contending standpoint, they're not like they were 2 years ago. And if I'm GM John Lynch, like I said, I would rather make a play for a quarterback of the future in the draft and trade up for that coveted player. Or if you watched my earlier podcast on Deshaun Watson, I would be more inclined to go all in on Deshaun Watson than I am more inclined to go for an aging player like Matthew Stafford. Because Matthew Stafford only has, like I said, 2 to 3 years left in him. You're going to trade a first-round pick who would likely be on a 5-year deal if you picked up his 5th-year option, as opposed to you would rather trade up that kind of capital and that type of financial flexibility to get an aging player in hopes that he would bring you a Super Bowl in 2 to 3 years' time with a depleted roster. It doesn't make sense. It makes zero sense to me. I'm not saying if Matthew Stafford does come to San Francisco and he won't be able to get the Niners Super Bowl, I'm not saying that he can't. I'm not saying that he won't. But what I am saying, if you look at it logically, the chances are it's not going to happen. Especially with a suspect offensive line behind him. Or in front of him, excuse me. Well, it would be behind him after the play. But anyways, you guys get the picture. If no quarterback can have success without an offensive line, no running game can have success without a strong offensive line, no wide receiver can have a strong game without an offensive line. It all starts up front, and until GM John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan get that through their head, it doesn't matter who's behind center. you need to find and solidify the offensive line. They should have got Tristan Wirfs, which I said in an earlier podcast, when my first podcast at number 13, they should have got Tristan Wirfs. Before, in my pre-draft analysis, I said they should get Tristan Wirfs, and they didn't. They rather trade back and get Javon Kinlaw, which is fine. But even at 13, I thought Tristan Wirfs should have been the guy. And who got Tristan Wirfs? Oh, to Tampa Bay Bucks. Oh, where are the Tampa Bay Bucks? Oh, that's right. They're playing tomorrow in the NFC Championship game. And Tristan Wirfs was what? Oh, yeah, he was a PFWA all-rookie team and also graded out as one of the best offensive tackles by, I hate to say it, but PFF. All right. So, like I said, Niners should not get emotional about these decisions. Don't make rash decisions. Build your team organically. Build it brick by brick through the draft. And supplement the missing pieces in free agency. Everything will be okay. This team is a team that still has its core players for the most part. Obviously, DeForest Buckner losing Emmanuel Sanders was huge, but they still got guys like Fred Warner as of right now. They still got guys like George Kittle signed for the long term. They still got guys like possibly Trent Williams coming back. Possibly. We don't know what's going on with there. But, there's still a lot of good pieces in place. You got Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. That could be arguably the best 1-2 punch in the NFL in terms of a young dynamic duo. And for people that are saying, oh, we should trade Deebo Samuel, you're crazy. Just because he had one injury-riddled season doesn't give anyone the benefit of the fact, oh, we should just wipe our hands clean of that player. I mean, that's just nonsense. I mean, everyone's saying Nick Bosa should be traded for Deshaun Watson. That's crazy talk. That's just crazy. Like, no, you don't do that. Absolutely not. But anyways, I'm getting upset because all these potential trades involving your core foundational players is bogus. It's baloney. Well, that'll be it for today. I hope you liked what I had to say. If you did, please hit the subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen as I keep all things Beast. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night. BEASTwriter. Out.